What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from Mtg on your device's screen. We like it a magic, in case you didn't know that. And today I got Igby with me. You'll never see the Igby bub. But anyway, that's the first treat. Second treat is that you clicked on a good one today. The top 25 Theros Beyond Death cards. And yeah, I could have done a top 50 like I've been doing the last couple of sets, but I really wanted to distill it into only like the most powerful and impactful cards from this set, to my mind at least. But that said, we're going to do things a little bit differently this time around, rather than having like one honorable mention at the beginning of the video. I'm going to wait till we get to about the top 3, and then I'm going to have more than one honorable mention. I'll just put it that way for now. But before we jump into it here, just make sure you do all the YouTube stuff. Like the video if you got the time. Sub and hit the bell for the noties, because it's almost Deck Tech season. And we got the pre-release guide coming out in a couple of days. You want to be subbed for all that stuff. Plus, you can hit the link in the description to go over to the Patreon, support this content if you want to. Just $1 a month will let you vote on what decks we do this season in the first place. Aside from that, you can click the link in the description to go to TCG Player, check out low prices on all of these cards on this list. And aside from that, I'm pretty sure we're actually about ready to go ahead and jump into it. So screw it, let's do it. Let's do it, y'all. I think we're ready. Let's start at number 25 with what I think is the most powerful common in the entire set. That's Thirst for Meaning. Now, you can call me thirsty if you want, but I can't wait to play with this stinking thing right here. If you remember playing with Thirst for Knowledge back in the day, you understand how amazing it is to just draw 3 cards at instant speed, which is really the best word on this card. The word instant really propels this into the stratosphere as far as like card quality goes, and having an instant speed draw 3 is always going to be amazing. Plus, you know, even if you don't end up discarding an enchantment, you can always just discard, you know, escape cards or cards that effectively have some form of flashback, stuff you can get out of your graveyard, reanimation targets and whatnot. There's all kinds of ways to use this card, even if you're not playing enchantments in your deck, so I expect a fair amount of play out of this thing. So we've covered a common, and by the way, I have 2 cats now, in case you didn't notice that. But anyway, I don't even know if you can see Igby down here, but he's still here. He's still being a bub. But he really doesn't mind when I pick him up like that. He loves it. Look at his belly. Look at how big the cat is. But anyway, I should talk about magic cards. Although I don't think anyone would really mind if I talked about cats. I think that's half of the reason y'all are here. But anyway, number 24, let's talk about an uncommon. Since we just talked about a common, but this is far from what I think is the best uncommon in the set. I'm still really excited about Destiny Weaver. It turns out, I was never too bothered by counterspells for the first 24 years of my Magic career, but it turns out when you play Arena like 6 hours a day, you start to really hate counterspells. So I'm excited for this, if nothing else as a sideboard piece, but I think some enchantment decks that want a turn 2 enchantment might actually end up just playing this in the main deck. Plus, it's got a sweet mana sink on it to give it a little bit more main deckable value. And the stat line is decent for 2 mana, too. I mean, what more could you like reasonably expect out of an uncommon 2-drop? Now, at number 23, we actually hit our first Planeswalker. This early on the list, we're going to talk about Ashiok. Because, honestly, I think Thirst for Meaning and Destiny Weaver might be just better cards than Ashiok. I'm not sure how much play this actually sees, but it is a 5-mana Planeswalker that creates creatures, and the creatures do something else cool. You know, basically mill your opponent, which could be good depending on what kind of deck you're playing. But it's also got like a pseudo removal ability. The ultimate's really good, so it's at least, in terms of how we usually judge 5-mana Planeswalkers, it's got all the hallmarks of a decent card. I'm just not sure that it's there enough to see a massive amount of standard play. But if you remember playing with the Ashiok during the Arena event, where you could play either the Ashiok or the Elspeth deck, Ashiok does do an awful lot of work once it's on the table, so I have some hopes for this card. But my number 22 is a 5-drop that I'm actually way more excited about, and that's Thrix. Now, I've already told you, with vis-a-vis Destiny Weaver, I'm not a big fan of counterspells at the moment. I wonder how many people I've upset with those comments, but I like to play Magic. I like to resolve spells. It's also got a good creature type, considering we got Realm Cloak Giant in the format right now, so Jeskai Giants? I think it's actually Jeskai Giants. But well, either way, we'll give it a try coming up in the next format because I really want to play with Thrix. But let's go ahead and get to number 21 here. Woe Strider. Love this card just because of the one line of text. You know, an expensive Viscera Seer is still a pretty decent card when it comes to standard, because these Aristocrats decks have been looking for a free sacrifice outlet that allows you to sacrifice as many creatures as you want in a given turn for a few sets now, and they finally got it. All this really had to be was Nantuko Husk, and it'd be a good card, but expensive Viscera Seer is still fantastic, especially given the extra lines of text on it that allow you to escape it out of your yard, so it's tough to deal with. It gets relatively big when you do escape it, and it's got okay stats when you play it in the first place. But honestly, if this did nothing else besides sack a creature, scry 1, I'd still be very excited about it, so it's got to be on my list somewhere. Let's officially get into the top 20 here with Galaga, another one of the better 2-drops in the whole set, and I think it might be a huge boon for the Gruul decks. But it's not the only card that the Gruul decks get, so I'd watch out for them in the upcoming format. But this is a great 2-drop to effectively replace Zertog Goblin, if it does. I'm still not 100% sure that not having access to a 2-mana 3/3 is, better. So we'll have to wait and see, because this is still going to be a 2-mana 2/2 haste that swings the same way Zertog Goblin does and all that. But it can also get you a pretty sweet form of card selection, and that's something Zertog Goblin can't do. It's also something these Gruul decks really want to have access to. I've told you before 100 times that I'm not a big fan of random discards. In fact, I kind of abhor random discarding, but obviously there's going to be a lot of situations in these Gruul decks where you're down to 1 land in your hand, or you're down to a fairly inconsequential card. Say, you got some kind of like a removal spell against a control deck or something like that. You're not going to use it, so why not? Just let it get discarded if you know you're going to discard it, considering it's the only card in your hand. Drawing an extra card is always amazing for aggro decks, and even though this does have a pretty righteous downside, the upside is enough, and it's aggressively costed enough, that I'm sure it's going to see play in Standard, if not also like Pioneer. This card could see multi-format play. I think it's that good. But speaking of drawing cards, number 19 is Setessan Champion. Now, I think that there are some things holding Champion back, given that 3 mana is more than you think, for an effect that you often won't proc until the turn after it comes into play. But we all kind of failed to evaluate Tireless Tracker correctly. And that card was amazing. I won't say all of us, but most of us failed to notice how good Tireless Tracker was going to be in the upcoming format when it was first released. And Tireless Tracker was incredible. This is also a green 3-drop that can draw you cards, so it's drawing a lot of comparisons. Even though I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Tire Tracks, I do think that in specific decks, it's going to do a pretty good impression. So it's got to be on the list somewhere, especially considering it's in a set where a lot of the cards are enchantments, a set that brings a lot of really playable enchantments into the Standard environment. So there's probably a home for Setessan Champion, and when it does find a home, it's probably going to be one of the most critical key pieces in the deck that it's in. But here at number 18, we finally hit a god. Tonight, Leah. We actually kind of have a god fight coming up in our next few entrants here, but I'll go ahead and put Nylea at the bottom of the god pile, and that's probably going to enrage some folks. I understand that, but just evaluating all the gods, except for maybe the Buy a Box promo, which doesn't appear on this list, just get that out of the way. I think that Nylea is the quote-unquote worst one, but that doesn't mean that Nylea is a bad card or anything. I think that a lot of green decks will probably end up playing like at least a 2 of Nylea, because why not, right? She's going to decrease the cost of a lot of your creatures. She's indestructible, and she's got a mana sink that effectively allows you to get card advantage. So there's just nothing really bad about this card. I just think a lot of the other cards the other gods are better. Let me put it that way, but Nylea is still a boss card. Number 17 is Thassa. I told you, we're getting into a god fight here. Thassa's ability to blink a creature every single turn has some pretty insane implications in the upcoming format, especially if you have a card like, say, Yarok on the table. But even if you don't, it's pretty easy to just blink a creature once, and that's backbreaking enough for your opponent. So just that line of text makes the card really interesting to me, but it's not like the card isn't a hugely statted, cheaply costing, indestructible god at the same time. So, like, good card all around. I'm not knocking it at all. Now, at number 16, we have our first tie, because they're both black 4-drops that I think will probably affect Standard in some way or another, but may end up going in different decks, although they may easily go in the same deck too. This entry is going to be Erebos and Nightmare Shepherd. Now, I had the inclination to put Nightmare Shepherd way higher on this list. Like, it's as far as cards I'm excited to play with, Nightmare Shepherd's probably in my top 5. So I am excited to play with Nightmare Shepherd, but I'm kind of tempering my expectations a little bit. Now, when it comes to Erebos, on the other hand, it's almost the exact opposite take. I think this card is not quite as good as a lot of folks are evaluating it. Although, that said, I still think it's a ridiculous card, right? I mean, just because I don't think it's as good as what some people are claiming it is, doesn't mean I think it's bad. You see, there's nuance. I know it's the internet, but there's nuance here. I think this is still a really strong Magic card, if only because it's an indestructible god with a ridiculous stat line. But it also gives you a sacrifice outlet, gives you a way to draw cards, sweet little mana sink if you got nothing else to do with your mana, and it does other stuff too. Like Erebos is a very good card and will probably slot directly in to these mono black devotion lists that everyone's trying to build right now. It's probably the most built deck so far of Theros Beyond Standard, and Theros Beyond Death Standard hasn't even started yet. But that said, Erebos is a card a lot of people are supremely excited about, and I'm on that list. I just can't say I'm as excited as some people. That said, still a dumb Magic card. Now, number 15 isn't a god, but it's still a 4-drop that you're going to have a really tough time killing, and that's Elspeth. I know this might be a little bit controversial. There are some people who just think that Elspeth is terrible. Like, absolutely bottom, throw it on the floor, keep it there, don't even sleeve it, just throw it on the floor. It's bad. But I just can't get behind that. This is a Planeswalker that you can effectively reanimate. I just don't think that I have the heart to call Elspeth bad, but it's also not one of the top 10 cards in the set or anything. But all that said, I still think it's way better than a lot of the community is evaluating it. And I think a Planeswalker that reanimates itself is honestly kind of scary. Let's go ahead and move on here to number 14. And it's kind of funny because after all of these indestructible literal gods and unkillable Planeswalkers and all that, I think that a card that's way more powerful than those, just a guy named Gary. That's just a dude named Gary right here. This is probably the quote-unquote best uncommon in the set, and it's definitely the reprint that we're all most excited to play with. I mean, I just got done saying Mono Black Devotion is the most built deck of the preseason at the very least, the most talked about deck, and Gary is the reason why. They reprinted this card and everyone lost their collective nuts when they did so, and there's a good reason for that. Grey Merchant is a ridiculous Magic card, has proven very good in the past in multiple formats, and I think this standard environment will not prove any different. Gary is crazy. Now at number 13 here, we've got a much better card with Elspeth's name in it, to my mind at least, and this is another decision that might seem controversial, but at number 13, I'm putting Elspeth Conquers Death. I think this card is amazing. The more I look at it, the more I really, really like it. And I was going to put it on the sleepers list, but honestly, I think that it has enough just raw power and obvious raw power that I'm going to put it on my real list. I am extremely excited to get my hands on this. Even though it costs 5 mana, and that does seem like an awful lot, we're trending towards like more mid-rangey decks that can play expensive cards since Throne of Eldraine Standard. And I don't think that's going to change, especially considering we just got 2 4-mana Wraths in this set. So I don't think that aggro is going to make a comeback or be an important deck, just because a new set comes out. If anything, I think that aggro is going to take even more of a nosedive. So this 5-mana play is going to be fairly easy to get to in most games of Standard, and it immediately busts the best permanent on the board most of the time. Even if you can't target stuff out of your opponent's graveyard like you could with the Eldest Reborn, I still think the ability to just grab any creature or planeswalker out of your yard, and make it better for that matter, is going to be freaking righteous. So I love this card. I think it's absolutely worth the 5-mana rate, and I cannot wait to start playing with it. Hey, did I just bring up 4-mana Wraths a second ago? Well, let's talk about those again with number 12, which is actually both Storm's Wrath and Shatter the Sky, because it's really tough for me to tell which of these is the better, quote-unquote better, 4-mana Wrath. Languish ended up seeing a ton of play last time I was in Standard, and, Storm's Wrath is effectively Languish that doesn't kill indestructible creatures. But of course, even if we did get literally Languish back, it still wouldn't kill any of the gods. Lava Coil doesn't kill any of the gods. They all have over 4 toughness. So this wouldn't kill gods even if they didn't have indestructibility. That said, it does kill just about every important aggro creature in the format except for things like Rotting Regisaur and Lovestruck Beast. And I think leaving those cards on the table is kind of a big deal when evaluating a card like Storm's Wrath. Now, Shatter the Sky doesn't leave anything on the table. It's just an unconditional Wrath that basically it just leaves indestructible guys on the table, which obviously could be important. But at the same time, it also often lets your opponent draw a card if they do have that Lovestruck Beast or that Rotting Regisaur. But that said, when you're comparing these two cards, I would rather kill the Rotting Regisaur and let them draw a card than let them keep their Rotting Regisaur, in most cases. So I think Shatter the Sky might be the better card, but considering these are both 4-mana Wraths, I wanted to put them together on the list. They are extremely impactful cards that'll probably end up seeing some amount of play no matter what. Now, my number 11, effectively the honorable mentions for the top 10, is a card that, like a week ago, I wouldn't have even put on the list. Like, maybe it's in the honorable mentions or something like that. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about NYX Blue Ancient. Even though, I should clear this up, I was originally apparently wrong in the preview video of this, where I said if you have a Nissa out, lands like forest tapped for 6. Apparently they don't. Apparently they just tap for 4. That's what everyone's telling me. But that's still really good that you can tap forest for 4 mana apiece. Once this is down, you have a Nissa on the table. Honestly, I think Nissa is probably going to be what makes this see some amount of play, just because Nissa, it's so easy to cast a 7-drop. But you could always make the case, oh, well, if I have 7 mana available, why not play like an Agent of Treachery or some other ridiculous 7-drop creature, Why don't I just end the game with, Enraged Forerunners when I have 8 mana rather than play this for 7 mana? I mean, those are all decent points, but I think that people are really getting away from how broken this kind of mana production can be. Even in just like a Temur Reclamation deck that's looking to cast Expansion Explosion for 1 million, this is probably at least something you want to test out because it makes getting to that Expansion Explosion for the win so much easier. But there's obviously a lot more you can do with this, given the fact that we got a bunch of finales in this format. We just got a bunch of interventions in this format that are all effectively X, right? So it's a very, very silly Magic card once it's on the table. And honestly, I think that its mana cost isn't prohibitive enough, I really don't, to keep it from seeing some amount of Standard play. And once it is on the table, it might end up being like the actual best card in Standard to have in play. But we've actually officially hit the top 10 here, and number 10 is a card that works really well with NYX Blue Ancient, and that's NYX Lotus. NYX Lotus, I think, might actually see some Standard play. 4 mana is a lot for a mana rock, but once you untap with it, even in a non-devotion-based deck, it's often going to start producing, 2, 3, 4 mana when it taps. And in a devotion-based deck, I could easily see a world where you're tapping this for 5, 6, 7, or more mana than that. Plus, imagine you do have a NYX Blue Ancient out, and you have, like, devotion to green for 5 or something. So you're just tapping a NYX Lotus for 15 mana. It's pretty insane, some of the things that NYX Lotus can do. So even though it's not Nykthos Shrine to Nyx or anything, some people are upset about it, I still think that it could see some amount of Standard play. But if nothing else, it's going to be a highly sought after commander card forever, for literally ever. So I'm pretty hype about NYX Lotus. And even though NYX Lotus and NYX Blue Ancient are both cards that I wasn't super excited about last week, the more I start thinking about them and the more I include the Commander community in my evaluation, the more I think that these are cards that absolutely deserve to be fairly high up on the list. Now here we are at number 9, which is Kruks. I want to think this card is actually way more powerful than I'm even evaluating it. I mean, it is in my top 10, so obviously I think it's powerful, but it may be even more powerful than that. This could kind of be like a mini Blightning or something, on turn 2, and then later in the game, another discard effect. And then it attacks another discard effect. Oh, no, by the way, they have to block it too, because it's freaking 6/6. If they do kill it with removal, it comes back. They have to discard something else. By the way, how easy is it going to actually be to kill this thing with removal, considering you're forcing them to discard removal? Maybe, right? So there's just a lot to this card that I didn't necessarily touch on the first time I evaluated it. And again, just like the last couple of cards, it's a card that, like, the more I think about it, the more I think that Rakdos and Grixis decks might play just incidental copies of this, because it's such a decent card. Even if you actually never escape it, just the discard effects might be good enough in the early game. If, say, you're playing Grixis and you didn't draw Thought Erasure in the early game, you still get a discard effect on turn 2, and that really helps a lot of Grixis decks end up, to where they can actually play their Nicol Bolas and stick it onto the battlefield. Early discard means a lot to these Grixis mid-range decks, and this is a card that's just tailor-made for them. Well, all right, we're at number 8, and from here on out, just a little public service announcement. I think that just about any of the cards left on this list could be number 1. I honestly do. I don't think there's a huge amount of separation between the cards from here on out. So let's go ahead. I keep clapping too much, right next to the mic. I apologize, headphones users. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to number 8, which is Peripherals. Peripherals could easily be the most broken card in the set, giving us a sneak attack in Standard, or a redundant sneak attack effect in Commander, or even a redundant sneak attack effect in Legacy. I'm calling it could actually be a severe mistake, because this is proven to be a broken ability time and time again, and we've got plenty of abusable creatures in the format right now, whether it's Ilharg or what Terror of Mount Velis, whatever that thing is that has double strike and give all your creatures double strike. Drakaseth. I mean, there's a million. I clapped again. I'm sorry. There's a million. I mean, I just named 3, but there are even more than that. Red creatures in this format that are really ridiculous to just sneak attack in for a super low cost. Plus, this goes in Fire's decks because it kind of lets you play extra spells in a turn. Right? You know, there's going to be times where you cast 2 spells for free with Fires, and then you use this to get your Cavalier down and attack for, 6 plus whatever other mana you have left to pump it. So, just a silly, silly magic card. Oh, by the way, it's also an indestructible god that's hard to kill and also swings itself when it has enough devotion. I mean, I keep kind of neglecting to mention that gods are going to be kind of good by themselves, just because, like, if you can ever actually turn them into creatures, put a bodysuit on them, then they kind of become really daunting cards to have to play around. So there's also that, which is worth an awful lot. But just the sneak attack text on this easily puts it in my top 10, and it honestly could be my number 1. But number 7 is Dryad of the Elysian Grove. This is another one that when I first saw it, I was like, yeah, Wayward Swordtooth, who cares? But, again, the more I think about it, like a Wayward Swordtooth plus kind of a Chromatic Lantern is insane. It's absolutely insane. Not to mention that it even combos with different cards in Standard, most notably Nissa, because all of your lands are forests, so they all tap for double mana. It's so crazy. It's even in the same color combination. You can hit Dryad on turn 2 after a Gilded Goose and Arboreal Grazer. Probably on Arboreal Grazer, because I imagine the decks that play this are going to be pretty high on land count, so just really backbreaking if you're able to get this down on turn 2 and then play another land and another 1-drop. Just imagine the board states you can develop fairly early in the game with this card. Oh, and by the way, it also works with Dread Presence. It makes all your lands swamps, so that's pretty cheeky, but it could be a real deck. It really could be. But if nothing else, just having, an Explore or Fast Bond variant like this in Standard is probably going to mean a lot, especially considering we have access to cards like Nissa and Growth Spiral and Arboreal Grazer that want us to play a bunch of lands in our deck anyway. Dryad looks like a pretty broken card to me. But at number 6, we're going to look at a card that has worked its way down from number 2. I have only rewritten this list like 3 times. Usually I drive myself crazy with rewrites on these lists at the beginning of the season. I think that for the last top 50 I did for Throne of Eldraine, I'm pretty sure I rewrote that list like 10 times. And it's not uncommon for me to do a dozen rewrites on these just to make sure that I'm happy with it. But this time I didn't do that many rewrites. But that said, that's cool story, bro, right? But anyway, let's get on to the actual card here at number 6. Pelucranos, because again, through a couple of rewrites, this card has gone down the list from number 2 all the way to number 6. But again, that still means it's a ludicrous Magic card, in my opinion. I mean, 4 mana for a 6/6 is a pretty decent deal right there. But if your opponent ever does find a way to deal with it, suddenly you get a 12/12. That's a good Magic card. And I shouldn't have to really drive the point home too much. That this is a crazy, ridiculous card that might affect more formats than just Standard on day 1. But at the same time, it does have some drawbacks. And in some ways, it's just kind of a pile of stats. And there are more exciting cards to talk about than a card that is effectively a pile of stats. But if you're going to praise a pile of stats, this is the one, son. This is a crazy Magic card that it's almost hard to understand how it got printed in the first place. It looks that dumb, but is it just a Timmy card or is it an actual competitive card? It is a 100% competitive card. I can promise that to you. Day 1, this will see play, but is it one of the most exciting and breakable cards in the set? I think it's far from it. Well, we've hit the top 5, everybody, so let me tell you about Klothys. Klothys is the other card. I alluded earlier that the Gruul decks are going to get more than one card in the upcoming Standard, and this is the one, everybody. This allows us to maybe stop playing like Thrashing Brontodon main deck, throw in Klothys, and this does so much for us. In terms of late game reach, this is incredible, even if you don't have a bodysuit on it. But if you do, it's a pretty freaking sweet creature too. A decently statted indestructible thing that swings in really goes well with Embercleave, because your opponent can't just spot remove it in response to you putting the Embercleave on it. right? You know, I guess I can spot remove another creature and maybe your devotion goes down, but hell, you just played an Embercleave, so your devotion to red and green's got a lot higher. So, I mean, this wears an Embercleave pretty well is what I'm trying to get at. It's really difficult to kill, and if it does stay out, which again, it probably will because it's difficult to kill, if it does stay out, it's going to start doing like damage for you every turn. Or every other turn or whatever, you know. It's just a righteous card that really gives the Gruul decks access to something they desperately needed, and that is reach in the late game. This does that, so I just don't see how the Gruul deck has too many glaring problems at this point. But we're getting late into the list here now, y'all. Number 4 is Shadowspear. We finally hit Shadowspear. You might have expected it later, or earlier on the list, or maybe in the honorable mentions, but I think this card is just outrageously powerful. Just 1 mana for this equipment, although it does cost 2 to equip, and you could argue that that's too much, but whatever. It just costs 1 mana to get this down in the first place, and it gives the creature this outrageous, just the craziest of boosts, you know? I guess if you wanted to whine, you could say that it should give more than +1/+1, but to my mind, the fact that this costs so little in the first place, it doesn't even have to give a PT boost to the creature, but thankfully it does. You know, you get +1/+1, you get trample and lifelink. It's so good. Like, it's also like a safety valve for any indestructible creatures, i.e. gods, or hexproof creatures that we have in the format. And there are a couple of hexproof baddies we might have to worry about, like the 8/8 on Erebos, the Sea God. Hexproof thing right there. So, you know, maybe. But all in all, this is just a good safety valve for killing gods, which is flavorfully what it does in the story, so that's kind of nice. But also, not only does this have the ability to kill gods without even being equipped to anything in the first place, but just the fact that you can give your Rotting Regisaur or Lovestruck Beast or Questing Beast +1/+1 trample and lifelink, insane. Freaking insane, if only because it's so cheap to cast. Any deck can play it, and I am very scared on day 1 of a Rotting Regisaur wearing this thing. But let's go ahead and get into the honorable mentions here before we clear out the top 3, because I've got a fair amount of honorable mentions to kind of breeze through here as quickly as we can before we get to the top 3. So first of all, I want to point out Treacherous Blessing. It's a great card and probably goes especially well in the Doom Foretold decks. There's also the Interventions. All of these look pretty good, and to my mind, the blue Intervention especially could see a lot of standard play. I'm also a huge fan of the black Intervention. Erebos' Intervention looks great to me, but all of these are playable in one format or another, and the green and white ones look especially fan-freaking-tastic in Commander decks. So I do like the Interventions, just couldn't find a spot for them on the list. Now, as far as the Temples go, this could be like the honorable mention. I think last time I made Temples my honorable mention because like they're not exciting, but yay, we've got them in the format. There's also Calyx, which I just couldn't find the heart to put on the main list, but this could be a great Planeswalker in enchantment-based decks, and there almost certainly will be enchantment-based decks in this format. There's also Siona, a card I'm very excited about, but don't actually have the highest hopes for competitive playability. I just really like her. Eat to Extinction is an amazing removal spell that gets around indestructibility and all that. Going to be a very important card to play for these control decks in the upcoming format. Also, Ox of Agonis, which could be on the main list, honestly. If I had to put any of these on the main list, it would probably be Ox of Agonis. I really like this thing, but I'm a little bit wary of, you know, Escape 8. That's a lot of cards, but this might actually end up being one of the better cards in the entire set once we actually get to play with the set. There's also Kunaros, which I can't find a spot for this, but in terms of like, you know, things that hose the themes that are prevalent in the set, this is maybe one of the best cards in the set for doing that, and it's got a pretty decent body, great stats, you know, good mana cost, great keyword abilities. There's just nothing wrong with this card, but I thought that a lot of the cards I've already put on the list are just objectively more powerful. That said, this is an amazing sideboard piece that you really don't get punished too much for main decking, so we'll probably see a lot of the good boy in the next format. But there's also Dream Trawler, my final honorable mention. I really wish, too, that I'd have found room for this on the list. It just looks like an unbelievable control finisher if you ever actually do get it down. And honestly, you don't even have to be playing control. Mid-range decks might really, really like this card, too, because once it's on the table, it's very hard to get off the table, unless, of course, they have a Shadowspear, so there's that. But, like I promised, we're finally in the top 3 here, and we'll start the top 3 with Helion. And I got to remind you that I said earlier that, like, past number 7 or 8, just about any card could be number 1. And Helion could easily be number 1 because it might be the most likely card to get banned from the entire set. So, like, honestly, like, that's number one material right there, right? But I'm honestly not that excited about the function of the card outside of its combo potential with things like Walking Ballista, with which it goes infinite. I'll be the millionth YouTuber to say the millionth time. I mean, by now you really should know. This goes infinite with Walking Ballista, probably going to be a Force and Pioneer, and probably even Modern, for what that's worth. But in Standard, this goes really well in the, like, a Johnny's Pride Mate, Bloodthirsty Aerialist, you know, black-white life gain deck, or just a mono-white life gain deck. Pairs extremely well with Linden. Just imagine swinging in with a Linden on the table while you have a Helion out. There's a lot of really cool little interactions this card has, and it's a sweet mana sink in the, you know, aside from all that. So I do love Helion. Aside from infinite combos, there's just not that much to get excited about on a life gain god. But if you want something to get excited about, let's talk about number 2, because I think this might actually end up being the real most broken card in the set. You know, infinite combos with Heliod aside. I just think that maybe the most dangerous card they printed in the set for any format is Underworld Breach. All the way up here at number 2. I remember the power of Yawgmoth's Will, and a lot of Commander players are still experiencing the power of Yawgmoth's Will. And although this isn't quite as good, it is cheaper. And that is obviously a very, very important thing in the game of Magic. I mean, a Yawgmoth's Will that costs less but punishes your graveyard resources more is a really interesting way to design a new Yawgmoth's Will. And they made it red, too. So, like, burn decks can play it, get that last few damage with Underworld Breach. I mean, there's just so many decks that want this, even decks that are fairly straightforward and aren't doing a bunch of weird combo stuff with it like you would expect. So, I just expect this card to make a ton of splashes in a bunch of different formats, and even in Standard, where it doesn't look supremely playable. We'll have to wait. I mean, maybe a couple of sets will come out and suddenly Underworld Breach is insane, because an effect like this is just inherently not only broken, but breakable, depending on what pieces you have in your card pool. So I expect this card to do an awful lot of things over the next few years. But here we are, number 1 card in the set, and by process of elimination, you probably already figured it out. But number 1, again, to the Standard guy around these parts, is Uro. Uro is just, again, I've used this word a lot. Hello again, chicken. But anyway, like I said, I've used this word a lot this previous season, but this could be a serious mistake. You know, we just got rid of a really problematic 3-drop in Simic at this exact mana cost. And yet they've printed another one, because this just looks like a bridge way too far, especially considering you can escape it out of your yard. And it does this again, like, just, ugh, it's so good. It's so good. And in terms of just, like, raw power level and stats, it's just maybe easily the best card in the set. Again, to my mind, but this is my list. So, you know, make your own list, put it on YouTube. I'll watch it. But in any case, you know, since this is my list, I'll put Uro at number 1, even though I'm not really sure how great it is outside of the Standard environment. I think that it is probably, on day 1, the single best card for the Standard environment out of the entire set. And yeah, turns out you can play it in Commander too, to pretty good effect. But I guess that's it for my list. I had to get a little bit closer to the camera. I had to move up on the couch because my back hurts. So I'm sorry if that was a freak out. You know, I was all the way back there a second ago. Smash cut. Here I am. But in any case, I guess I'm done for this one. Just let me know how you felt about the list. Anything I left off of it, including anything I left out of the honorable mentions that you think should be in there. Please let me know about it. I often miss at least one ridiculous card. So hit me up in the comments section. Let me know how you felt about it. And do all the YouTube stuff I said at the beginning of the video. Like the video, subscribe, do all the things. Patreon, you know, helps me out a lot. If you enjoy my content, I put a lot of work and heart and soul into it. So reward me if you want to. And I'll even let you vote on what you want to do this season. So yeah. Well, anyway, I think that's more or less it. And we've already been here a good long time today. So I don't want to waste any more of your time. I'll just let you know that I'm Dev from the place. And I'll catch you cats later. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.